Hi. There was an interesting story in the press this week. It was about Generation Z, or Gen Z. People in Gen Z were born between 1997 and 2012. So they're aged roughly 13 to 28. And most of the students currently at Prior Park would fit into that bracket. There was a recent survey which concluded that this generation were the most likely to pay a professional to carry out basic tasks around the home or in the car. Nearly a quarter of Gen Zs can't change a light bulb, and a fifth didn't know what a spanner was. Only 57% of them said they knew how to add air to a car tyre. Essentially, more and more young people seem not to be able to do it themselves. Rather than DIY, they pay someone else to do jobs around the house. This got me thinking, is this something to do with how perceptions have shifted around gender at home and in the workplace? Now, previous generations used to speak about blue jobs and pink jobs at home. Blue jobs were the ones typically done by men. Things like taking the bins out, changing light bulbs, maintaining the family car. Pink jobs were things like cleaning the house, cooking the meals, remembering birthdays and buying presents, and were usually done by women. Perhaps the best example of the difference in how women and men used to behave in the home is with babies. Many years ago, few fathers would ever have fed a baby or changed a nappy. That was woman's work. And nowadays, I doubt if there were many, if any, students here whose father didn't change their nappy or do story time with them before bed when they were little. When I think of my late grandparents, I can say with utter confidence that I never saw my grandfather in the kitchen, ever. And I never saw my grandmother put the bins out, ever. It might be interesting to think whether there are still some jobs in your house which are gendered, jobs which only your mum or only your dad does. For the most part, I suspect that there aren't. The world has evolved and the world has changed, and thank goodness for that. However, with a shift to a world where we don't have blue or pink jobs anymore, I wonder if some things may have gotten lost. The survey that showed that Gen Z can't change a light bulb might be a sign that those traditional male jobs just aren't being done by anyone. Equally, those traditionally female jobs aren't being done as much. Gen Z are the generation most dependent upon Deliveroo, and they're the most likely to throw away food because they don't know what to do with leftover ingredients. Most sensible people would agree that there aren't any jobs that women can't do, or that men can't do, either in the home or in the workplace. However, that's a relatively recent change. It was only in 2018 that the world-famous Norland College, here in Bath, admitted men to train as nannies for the first time. It was even later, in 2021, that 2 women were able to tackle the selection process for the elite SAS, which until then had only had male soldiers. Things have moved on a very long way in a comparatively short time to make our society more equal in terms of the opportunities available to both men and women. On one level, it feels as if we have a society which is more equal than ever. However, I'm not sure it always feels that way to young people. Last month, the Minister in charge of Education in England stated that one of the most urgent challenges facing education was the radicalisation of boys, who are being taught to view women and girls in an offensive and derogatory way by online influencers like Andrew Tate. Now, you might think that I'm going to rail against the online behaviour of teenage boys, the evils of the so-called manosphere online, and the danger to women and girls that it poses. Not quite. Instead, I want to look at what it is like to be a boy today. I want to try and understand why boys might be drawn into the world of online sexism and misogyny. I've been spending a good few weeks reading, researching, thinking, and trying to define what it means to be a man in 2025. And I'll be honest, I've been struggling. I spoke about my grandparents earlier, and I don't think that it was at all difficult for them to understand what being a man meant. My grandfather Bert was born in 1922. He fought in the Second World War, was captured by the Nazis after being shot down on D-Day, and after the war he worked in finance in London. Bert married my grandmother Beryl when he was 30, and he provided for her and their 6 children until the day he died, incidentally on the exact same day as my youngest son was born. 1 in, 1 out. Spooky. My grandfather showed me a lot about what being a man meant to him and his generation. He provided for a very large, very Catholic family. He protected his country by fighting for it when called upon to do so. He was big, strong, and could do any job that was needed around the house or on a car. He liked to pipe, or two, and he liked to do the cryptic crossword. He was clever, he was loving, and he was caring. I wonder, though, if in part it was easy for him to know what being a man was because his wife did all the traditionally female jobs. My grandmother didn't do a paid job after she got married. My grandfather did all the providing. He knew his job and he fulfilled it. He did what was thought of then as a man's job, and he was masculine and proud of that. I think that nowadays, though, the word masculine is rarely heard in a positive sense. It's often heard alongside another word, toxic, as in toxic masculinity. You will rarely hear today about any masculinity that isn't toxic, and in part, that may well be because we've lost any sense today of what being masculine is about. We don't live in a world where men alone are expected to provide for their family. We don't live in a world where men are the only ones expected to protect their families or their countries. This is undeniably a good thing. When men were in charge, women were invariably thought of as less than. Sexism was commonplace and accepted. Whilst it was much easier for a man to know what his place was, that did not lead to an equal or fair society. Women were expected to know their place and to know that that place was inferior to that of a man. We've moved on a long way since then, and we all know that women can do pretty much any job a man can do and are not inferior in any way to men. This is a good thing. I wonder, though, if we've worked so hard to teach women and girls that there is nothing that they can't do, that we have, to an extent, erased what being a man is and means. It may be in part because of this that horrible online sexists like Andrew Tate can convince confused and vulnerable young men that being a man should mean that you are sexist, that you should degrade and dominate women to be a man today, and that all men's problems are the fault of women. They might be able to do this in part because being a boy isn't always easy, and the statistics bear this out. In educational attainment within the UK, boys consistently underperform when compared with girls across all age groups. Girls do better at boys than at A-level across the country, and men are much less likely to progress to higher education. For example, 54% of female school leavers in 2022 were in higher education, and only 40% of boys. Boys are also more likely to drop out of university than girls. Teenage boys are over 3 times more likely to commit suicide than girls of the same age. And at the same time, we know that girls are far more likely to suffer sexual harassment in schools than boys, and that girls are significantly more likely to be sent unwanted sexual messages online than boys. We know that 41% of the girls in the UK who are aged 14 to 17 and in an intimate relationship experience some form of sexual violence from their partner. In short, it seems being a teenage boy is hard, and being a teenage girl continues to be hard. It's all quite depressing. So what's the answer? Well, I think that the answer must be to talk about these things more than we have been, as a society and yes, as a school. Female students across the year groups here continue to be frustrated about how they can sometimes be treated by male students. They can be reluctant to call it out for fear of being seen as whingers. Male students continue to be worried about being cancelled if they behave in any way that might be perceived as inappropriate. I think that this combination is dreadful. Fear on both sides doesn't just exist here at Prior Park, it's part of the teenage experience, and that has to change. And it can only change, though, with conversation, with education, and with everyone reclaiming masculinity and realising that being masculine can be a good thing when it is done right. And to ensure that, we need stronger male role models than we have now. We live in a world where young women are told, this girl can, where the majority of the new presenters of that most traditionally masculine of TV programmes, Match of the Day, are women, where the most powerful and bankable pop stars in the world are also women, Taylor Swift, Beyonce. There are amazing, strong, powerful female role models everywhere, and that's great. But I wonder, though, how many internationally recognised and respected male role models there are. Donald Trump, who has freely admitted to sexually harassing women. Elon Musk, who disappears further and further down the nutty conspiracy theory rabbit hole by the day. It's hard to point to any single internationally known man and say, there, That's it. That's what men today should value, and that's how men today should behave. Much of what used to make men men was about protection or providing. My grandfather did both those in his time, and he did them brilliantly. However, for men today, protecting or providing are not as necessary as they once were. The workplace is more equitable. Women don't need money from men. The world of relationships is fairer. Women don't need to tolerate unacceptable behaviour or violence from men. Few families today subscribe to that old patriarchal model of blue jobs and pink jobs. Equality is the norm across this country, and that's great. We don't need to talk about patriarchs protecting or providing anymore. I wonder though if instead, when we talk about masculinity today, we might use another P, purpose. My grandfather was a masculine man because he had real purpose in his life. In his time, that purpose was to protect and provide. Today, we still need men to have that sense of purpose. And when they don't, when they look for people to blame for their troubles and difficulties, then we see a spike in online misogyny and in real-world harassment and violence towards women and girls. So what might that purpose be? Well, I'd suggest that a purpose for young men might be about developing strength, which has throughout history been seen as an especially masculine trait. However, in 2025, that purpose needn't be about just developing physical strength. Men today don't have to hunt and gather our own food, other than from Sainsbury's. Today's young men can pursue a strength that might be intellectual or emotional. It can, of course, still be physical. There's nothing wrong with that. A young man might have a purpose of becoming kinder. Their purpose might too become better read. Their purpose might be to help others. If that purpose is noble, if that purpose makes the world a better place for themselves and all those around them, then that purpose will have worth and it will have value, and so will they. If we focus on the positives of masculinity and not only its toxicity, and if we talk about how being a young man can and should have purpose, that doesn't take away from women and girls. In contrast, it makes life better for them. Listless, angry and disgruntled men aren't a help to anyone. Purposeful, proud, practical men make the whole world better. A pursuit of purpose for young men doesn't mean that women and girls can't equally have purpose in their lives. However, young men need to regain a sense of purpose that as a group they appear to have lost. A sense of personal purpose will make a difference to their lives. Equality is good for everyone, and it's a noble aim. Young women knowing they can do anything makes the whole of society stronger. Equally, young men having purpose makes the world better for themselves and their friends, but also, and importantly, for their mothers, for their sisters, for their wives, for their girlfriends, for their female colleagues and for their female friends. It is time for men to step up and regain a purpose that they've lost over the past few decades. Male purpose is the only thing that will stop the rise in misogyny, both online and in person, that our society has seen jump over the past few years. Now, I usually finish assemblies with a prayer, but instead I will finish with a brief reading from the letter of St. Paul to Timothy, which hopefully is sufficient to the moment. Let no one despise your youth, but be an example in conduct, in love and in spirit. Do not neglect the gift that is in you. Give yourself entirely to your gifts so that your progress can be seen by everyone. Doing this will save you and all those around you.